Welcome to Pep Talks with Jeanne. I'm your host, Jeanne Pepper. I started doing Pep Talks as a way to inspire you to do intentional acts of kindness and to further the goals of #BlazeItForward. Since its inception, Pep Talks has evolved, and now I use it to interview people actively making a difference in this world through their volunteerism, community service, or careers. My guests are all here because they have dedicated their lives to making this world a better place. Join us as we delve into the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of these truly inspiring and hardworking people. This season, we will be using a panel format in some of our episodes to bring together synergistic guests to discuss topics that weave the social fabric of the world around us. Welcome to another episode of Pep Talks with Jeanne. Welcome to Pep Talks with Jeanne. I'm excited to introduce my next guest, Regan Phillips from CASA. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it wasn't easy getting you here. You're a very busy lady.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm very, very happy to make time to be here and talk to you and talk about CASA. It's pretty much my favorite thing to do. So.
Oh, that's beautiful because this is what you do full time.
It is.
This is your life now.
This is, it feels a little bit like a life's calling in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of CASA, which is why I've had two of your CASA, what do you call them?
Our advocates?
Your CASA advocates
Yes.
here. Susanna Wolf and Elisa Abacassis both came in, both have podcasts here.
Amazing women, both of them.
Very wonderful volunteers who have made CASA their passion too.
Yeah.
And really take it seriously and have really benefited from the experience, maybe as much as the kids that they help.
That's not surprising to hear. I actually feel like that's a common refrain that we hear from volunteers. A lot of folks will approach the role with a little bit of, trepidation. We have a significant training that we make them, participate in. We are very serious about our vetting process as a conduit to the most vulnerable kids in our community. We have to background check and interview and get references. And then, it's a sophisticated opportunity is how I like to explain it. And it is truly not for everyone, but it can feel very intimidating to folks. And so I think that what I love to hear, and I hear it a lot, is from these folks that say, yeah, I do think that I have been changed by this experience, maybe even more so than the child. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I think a lot of folks, when you volunteer, you're kind of looking for that quick dopamine hit of doing something in the moment, serving food, or just getting that rush of a feel good moment. And CASA doesn't quite work that way. It's a little bit of a long haul to get there, but the difference is so impactful for these kids to have someone that's showing up just for them and paying attention to them and choosing to be a part of their lives and to take the time to then share that information with people who are responsible for making decisions on their behalf.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
You have a really impressive background. Regan went as undergraduate at USC. She got her master's in social work.
Yes.
From Columbia University.
I did.
And then you went on to get your JD at Chapman University here in Orange County. You also, when you were at Columbia, you were working in child protective services or child advocacy at that time as well.
I actually had a 1-year internship with CASA of New York City. So when I say it's kind of like a life's passion, I do feel like it's been a bit of a full circle story for me, starting there, not really knowing anything about the dependency system and having that internship, experiencing that work, and then making a decision at that point to go to law school, which was not something that I really saw in my future at the time, but realized very quickly as a participant in those proceedings in juvenile court that these attorneys, I think my impression at the time was that there was a bit of apathy for the kids as the volunteer or as the intern for CASA, coming in feeling like I had more information, more awareness about what was going on. I felt like, well, if I had maybe these letters behind my name or this educational opportunity, I could be a better, more impactful attorney for these kids. then fast forward to me going to law school, working throughout that time for the local firm here that represents kids in the foster care system, and then ultimately becoming an attorney. It was interesting to then realize that what I had, I think, perceived to be apathy was just sheer overwhelm. There are just too many cases, and these attorneys and these social workers that are assigned to them are truly overwhelmed. And so as the CASA, it really did make a significant difference to have that additional voice and that perspective.
Okay, I'm going to have you now, I want you to unpack for us exactly how CASA works in the system. What is their role in the system so that our listeners can understand the importance of having CASA part of this system in general? I mean, you don't need to be there because the kids are represented by social workers and attorneys. Right. So this is all an added benefit to these kids, but it's a life-saving it's almost a way to ensure that these kids have an opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And I'll back up for a second just and say that CASA is an acronym because sometimes even that can be hard for people. It stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates.
Yes.
And it's a concept and a program that now spans, I think, 49 states. There's 960 organizations throughout the country, 44 here in the state of California, and 52 counties. But it was created by a judge in the state of Washington who was presiding over these cases. And these are sensitive matters where a family is in crisis and children have been removed from their family of origin because of some kind of abuse, neglect, or abandonment that has been determined by social services to be pretty egregious. I mean, the government doesn't intervene and take your kids away unless it's pretty serious stuff. At that point, the judge now goes through a series of procedures to determine if that was in fact appropriate, if what the family now needs to potentially reunify. That is always the underlying goal at the start. Almost always the goal, very, very few exceptions, to reunify the family if it's safe and appropriate. So what services will be awarded to that family, and then how can we manage and oversee? There's a lot that goes into these proceedings. Sometimes the family can safely reunify and leave the system. But sadly, often that does not occur. And at some point, the judge then has to make a determination that no more services will be awarded to the parents. And we got to now focus on what's going to happen with this child and what their plan is going to be. Are they going to be able to be adopted out of the system by someone else? Are they going to end up being essentially what they refer to as a legal orphan and remain in the system until the age of majority, where they then go out and join the ranks of society? So this judge who was overseeing these cases and all of these families and all of these children for extended periods of time really thought, I have the attorneys and the social workers and all these people providing me with information that is required by the law and by the code, but I don't really know a lot about this kid, what they like, what they don't like, what they want to do that maybe they're not getting the opportunity to do. It really gives these kids an opportunity to be humanized in that forum. The children are always invited to participate and attend, and they are awarded, at least here in Orange County, appointed, I should say, an attorney. They have a social worker. They have, lots of different professionals in their life that are assigned to their case and care about them, the child, and making a difference. But as I mentioned previously, they got a lot of other cases too, and there's a lot going on. So having one person that is just showing up because they're choosing it and paying attention to this kid and what they need in a different way. And then what's really remarkable about the program is that this judge doubled down and said, we're going to recruit community volunteers. I tell people we need you to be over 21, clear a pretty extensive background check, open heart, open mind. We will give you the rest. You don't need to have any education or awareness or skills in the law or psychology or social work, any of those things. We will help you on that journey. But you're showing up for that kid. You're then being invited into the courtroom, which are closed confidential proceedings because they involve juveniles. And you are given the floor to share with recommendations and a report that everybody reads and gets to develop a better understanding about that child.
Do men do this?
Yes, we would love for men to do this. The population of youth in foster care is, pretty roughly 50-50. But we definitely see a higher volume of women coming in, and we can certainly match women with male youth. But I think it's nice when young men and boys can have a male role model in their life. So we definitely are intentional about trying to recruit more men always. We have an auxiliary that's dedicated to this, our Men of CASA, and they gather monthly or pretty regularly and try to bring their friends together to educate them about CASA. And
it sounds like something that would be good for men and women.
Oh, yeah.
When they retire even.
Absolutely.
They might be really good candidates for this. As I know, a lot of people are retiring young from government jobs maybe, and if they haven't found something that they're passionate about, this might be something that might be good
for sure. You know, we get all types of folks, you know, from literally early 20s to, I think we've got folks in their 80s that do this and have taken several cases. And what's really beautiful to me is the relationships that really develop with these kids. I had an advocate who was with us for, I don't know, 10 years, and he'd worked with 5 different kids. He's maybe in his mid 70s. And the first youth that he was matched with asked him to be the best man in his wedding. So, you know, again, the role is really our involvement as the organization and our supervision and our involvement and overseeing these volunteers lasts through the duration of the case. So as long as the court has jurisdiction over these kids, our volunteers are subject to our rules and regulations because they're a representative of the organization. However, when the case closes, the advocate and the youth often continue to have a relationship because they've now been in each other's lives for a long time, and there are no more rules from us anyway about how they choose to engage with each other. And so we have advocates that attend graduations, and you know that the youth come to their home for holiday dinners.
The cutoff point is 18, because at 18 you don't have to be in the foster system anymore.
Well, you're right in the sense that at 18 you're an adult.
Yeah.
But in 2012, some legislation was passed that allowed for children to elect to remain in the system until the age of 21. It's a choice, but I think what they were finding is that a lot of these kids, like any kid, you know, getting that to the age of majority, wanting to feel like they're not subject to any of the rules that they don't like, or thinking that they're ready for whatever's next. But I don't know. I mean, I didn't feel like I was ready at 18 to go out and do my own thing. And I had, you know, I did not have the same experience as a lot of the kids that we're working with. So I think there was a realization that unleashing these kids out into the world at 18 was perhaps not serving them. So as long as these kids were in the system before they were 18, they have a job or are in school and are complying to some extent with the rules of the court, they can actually even elect to come back when they kind of get out into the world and think, maybe I do need a little more support.
So coming back means you are assigned a CASA again, and that CASA is allowed to be your advocate, be your friend, be your pseudo-parent, or whatever it is that you need.
Potentially.
Yeah, all of those things.
Potentially. And oftentimes, if we have a kid that is matched with a CASA that is approaching that age of majority at 18, it's our CASA that's actively talking to them about the benefits of staying in as what we call a non-minor dependent, and making that election so that they can take advantage of the opportunities that are still going to be available to them and help them understand that.
Does CASA get paid by the government for each one of these kids?
No.
Not at all.
So I will say that at this stage in 2025, we are CASA of Orange County is 83% privately funded. Now, I've been with the organization, and in July, it will be 10 years that I've been working inside the organization here in Orange County. And when I started, I want to say we were closer to 99% privately funded. We have, over the years, increased that amount, mainly through the California state budget. Our California CASA umbrella organization has been able to get us on the California state budget's radar in the last 3 years. But that funding is sunsetting this year. So this is our last year of getting funding from the California state budget as of this point in time.
Okay. How will that affect this CASA, the Orange County CASA?
We will have to identify new sources of revenue to fill that void. We do get some funding. Essentially the funding that we've gotten since the beginning was through judicial counsel. It's a very small amount of money that each CASA gets. I think people assume that because we are a part of the court system that we do get funding that goes to the court system, but we're not a mandatory part of this dependency process. We are an elective. We serve at the pleasure of the court, is what I tell people. We are a codified part of the Welfare and Institutions Code, so we are empowered and legally entitled to be there. But it's not a right that these children have to have a CASA. So there is no funding that's coming through the courts for us. We've been able to secure funding through the federal government in recent years through the Victims of Crime Act. But some of that funding is actually waning as well. So while our numbers have crept up, we started zero every year. So we got to go out and figure out how we're going to bring.
Wow. Do you have competitors? Are there any other organizations that do this kind of work?
There are a lot of really wonderful organizations in Orange County. I think there's over 5,000 nonprofits in Orange County alone. It's a lot. And we certainly try to partner and be strategic with our resources and utilizing other organizations and when available and when it makes sense. But we are the only nonprofit organization that is empowered to be a part of the juvenile court proceedings with volunteers in this way. So while there may be other organizations that do things in support of youth of foster care, they are not granted the ability to go into the courtroom, speak to the judge, make recommendations for the child, communicate with their social worker, foster family, teacher, therapist, doctors. I mean, it's pretty remarkable when you think about how the court invites our organization to be a part of these children's lives in the case.
I'm thinking of like Orangewood, which another local organization that's
absolutely,
you must be working with them. I would think, but they don't have that power to go into court and be there and have a say in anything.
Correct. They don't operate the same way.
Yeah. Now, okay. So these kids, they've got a social worker that's assigned to them. They have an attorney that's assigned to them. So when they go into court at one of these welfare checks, or I don't know if they would be part of the parental termination hearings. I'm sure they are.
All of it.
Do the CASAs get any say, or are they just there to hold the hand of the child?
They absolutely have a say. First of all, there is an expectation that if there is information, let me back up. These hearings are pretty much happening at least twice a year. Not often, but at a minimum, they're happening twice a year. At these hearings, the CASA is invited not only to attend, but to prepare a written report that will go into evidence that all of the parties have the opportunity to read, including the judge. And this report can include information about the child, that might not be included in other reports about, needs they may have, the things that they're doing, interests that they have, areas of opportunity perhaps for the court to be involved. So the report comes in, and they are also invited to be present in the courtroom, and the court will always acknowledge them and invite them to share if there's been any updates since the time that they presented and submitted their reports, and have them weigh in if there's a disagreement about something impacting the child. And sometimes it's not that contentious, or it's not that deep, so to speak. And there is just a formality of going to court and making sure that all of these things are being done. And the CASA is just there to, to share their perspective. It can range. They've also been invited to participate in actual litigated proceedings. Doesn't happen often, but they may be a witness in a contested matter affecting the family or the child. So again, they are invited to be a part of whatever is happening in court. And it could be significant and contentious, or it may be just a matter of making sure everything's going smoothly and the child's getting everything they need.
Yeah. So is there anything about CASA that the public should know about your needs, about what does CASA need from us as the public?
I think the most important thing for me is that people just know about us in general. I think there's still quite a void of knowledge about the fact that we even exist. And it's not an easy thing to explain for folks, Our elevator pitch, I have someone on my team that will say, we need to give you our elevator pitch. We need, a 100-story building because it's a complicated, layered, and again, like I said, sophisticated volunteer opportunity. But at the end of the day, I like to think about this as you're just showing up. We say at CASA of Orange County, showing up is extraordinary. And there is just something so magical for these kids about showing up. And I don't want to underestimate the difficulty of that for the volunteers, because you're walking into a situation with a child who is unequivocally, undoubtedly experienced real trauma. There is actual trauma whenever you're removed from your situation, regardless of how objectively egregious the circumstances were that warranted the removal. So there's two traumas, right? There's the underlying trauma, and then there's the secondary trauma. And they are sometimes a little bit uneasy about trusting some new person that's just showing up in their life. There's now been all these new people that are asking them questions. What's your story? Let me fill out my forms. And, it's a lot of change. It's a lot of stress. These volunteers really are coached to show up, not to talk about what's going on in their life, to elicit information organically and as it naturally comes out. And sometimes that can take a really long time. These kids have been disappointed or let down by the very people in their lives that are supposed to love them unconditionally and always be there for them. So I do think that there's a trust issue that comes up. I overheard a conversation between one of our advocate supervisors. That's the primary staffing position that we have, primary position that we staff for at CASA to supervise all of our volunteers. And I overheard her coaching a volunteer on the phone who had been matched with her youth for about 6 months and was feeling really defeated, saying, I go every week to pick her up and, she gets in the car and she won't say anything. And I try to talk to her and ask her questions, but she doesn't say anything. And I don't think I'm making a difference. I don't think this is benefiting her. I'm feeling frustrated and I don't know what to do. And the advocate supervisor says, let's just back up for a second. She's getting in the car. And that's kind of where you have to start. You have to start on their terms, because if she didn't want to go, if she truly didn't have any interest in seeing if this is going to be a meaningful relationship, she wouldn't even bother. So a lot of what we do is help the volunteer just stay the course, feel appreciated and seen and valued, because as you can tell, they may not necessarily be getting that from the child that they're matched with, especially if it's a teenager. I've got a few of those myself, and so I know that it's a challenging time for everyone. But I think our volunteers are angels on earth, and I think everyone should know about how incredible these humans are that sign up to do this and keep coming back, even when it's hard and even when they're kind of secondarily experiencing the trauma and circumstances of these kids. It's hard. Yeah. It's really hard.
Some of these kids may have been subject to human trafficking.
Absolutely. So
in that event, is there a high risk that they may try to return to the people that were harming them in the first place?
Absolutely.
So are the CASAs trained on how to look for signs that could become a problem?
Yeah, we have certainly, again, at the outset of their experience, we have 34 hours of training that we have them go through. And that's, in many instances, just scratching the surface because they haven't yet been matched with their youth. Yeah. And then when they get matched with the youth, they're learning about that kid's unique circumstances, whether there be educational issues, they're the subject of a human trafficking. We have a whole court dedicated to our CSEC population, which are commercially sexually exploited children. And so we then have secondary trainings and offerings for our volunteers, depending on what specific issue they may be encountering. We have kids that are part of the juvenile justice system, meaning they have a delinquency case that's been opened. So now they're going to, their advocate is not only attending their dependency court, but they're now invited to attend their delinquency proceedings. And I will tell you that we have had great success with our advocates in that forum, presenting information to the judge that has helped the child be seen in a different way and their circumstances better understood, lessen their, criminal charges when appropriate.
Yeah. Are the CASAs, do they have any kind of a fiduciary duty to these kids? Or is there any confidentiality in the?
Yes.
Okay. So they can't take something this kid has told them and give it to police and say, this kid has advised me that usually psychologists, I think, have to tell law enforcement if they learn from a patient that there could be a crime that could be committed by that patient, or right?
Certainly.
So in this case, is the CASA allowed or expected to do that?
Well, I certainly we have the confidentiality piece that applies to everybody that's going to be assigned to a youth or attending court proceedings, which we invite some of our guests and supporters to do on occasion. But yeah, all of our volunteers are trained to be mandatory reporters.
Okay.
So they are empowered to call in when there are circumstances warranted, and those are very specifically reviewed, and they're trained on that. And additionally, they have a very close relationship in many instances with the attorneys of record. So not only are they then sharing potentially sensitive information that they may not know what to do with. I mean, we never want the volunteers to feel like they're alone or without support. So they can always come and talk to somebody on our staff. And then, of course, they're empowered to speak to attorneys, social workers that are affiliated with that child's case to, make sure that the right folks are getting the right information.
So if a CASA is better funded than another, would they take on some of the casework of another CASA if they can't get to everybody in their area, or does it not work that way?
Not traditionally. I do know that there have been CASAs that have stepped in and taken over when it's made sense and when it's been feasible. San Diego, for instance, which goes by the name Voices for Children, has taken Riverside under their wing because they were going through a tough time at some point. But that's not typical. Yeah. But now those two are combined. We do sometimes get kids that are under the jurisdiction of another court in another part of the state where there is a CASA, but they're placed in Orange County because that's where their foster family or legal guardian is going to live, or whatever that situation has turned out to be, and we'll get a call maybe to do a check on them. We are unable to secure a volunteer for every kid that's even referred to CASA of Orange County. So we really want to try to prioritize the kids that we're serving here in Orange County that need an advocate first and foremost.
So you cannot help every child here.
We cannot.
Could you do it if you had more volunteers?
Certainly that would help. I mean, there are, and the number fluctuates almost daily, but on balance right now, there are about 3,100 kids in the foster care system in Orange County. And we've got about 768 active volunteers right now.
That's great.
Right. And so over the course of a year, we'll serve ideally probably, a little over 1,000 kids total, between matches closing, new ones starting, and new people coming on board. But that's still, a fraction.
A third.
Yeah.
A third.
It's a third.
So 2/3 of these kids, is there some kind of a triage that's done to determine who needs the care most?
Yeah, I love that you use that word too, because it's really something that we talk about internally.
Yeah.
We actually triage for a number of reasons. I mean, certainly when a youth has been referred to us, and it can be the judge that's referring the case to us, it can be an attorney, a social worker, sometimes the youth themselves, if they're at a group home or they're living somewhere with other kids who they've seen have a CASA come and get them. They'd say, I want one of those. I want to go out and do something fun. So sometimes the kid will even request it. And we, of course, also have the ability to go in and assess cases at the outset to determine where our resources are best used. But there's a really thoughtful matching process that we utilize so that we match kids and advocates, kids who really are at risk, the most risk, meaning that they don't have a strong support system. They're not likely to reunify with family, and there doesn't seem to be somebody out there waiting in the wings to take them in. So we don't want anyone to walk that journey alone. So we do prioritize the one-on-one relationship for those kids. There may be kids that we can't match right away because there's a language barrier, because geographically it's challenging to find somebody who can connect with them based on their placement. Sometimes kids refuse. They think that this is not for me. I don't think I need this. Right. When we do get these referrals, however, we try to make sure that we're getting some level of benefit or advocacy to the court on their behalf. And one of the ways that we do that is by actually doing a family search to identify other family that may not be known or currently identified by the social worker to engage with the child and potentially be a placement for them.
Oh, so a CASA advocate might look for family for this child who's in a foster care situation?
Yes.
Or temporary housing?
Yes. It might be the CASA advocate. It may be our staff. And this is yet another way that we can leverage volunteer participation, because those volunteers may not have the time or emotional bandwidth to be a match for a child and have that direct relationship, but they can do this research work on the front end and never maybe even meet a child, but have a critical hand in providing some level of information to the court that will create great impact.
So so some of these advocates never even meet a child. They're kind of in the back office.
If they're doing that family finding work exclusively, absolutely.
Okay, so there are some advocates that are dedicated to family finding.
Correct.
Oh, that's really interesting. What percentage of your 800 approximately volunteers are on that side?
So it's very small. This is a growing area of advocacy for us.
Yeah.
It's also used for some as a in-between a sort of opportunity. Maybe they've rotated off of a case that was kind of hard and they don't necessarily want to walk away, but they're not ready to take on a new relationship yet. And this is a way for them to stay involved, feel like they're making a difference. It's a small number of volunteers that do that exclusively, but it's something we are actively growing. We are piloting right now with one courtroom. There are 6 courtrooms that do this work exclusively in Orange County. We're trying ultimately to get into all 6.
Oh, that's really ambitious. I like that.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that people come back to you and tell you was the most rewarding? Like, do you have some like really interesting stories about cases like that come to mind? Yeah,
I mean, I think the things that touch me the most are the really sort of basic, the simplest things. It's going to make me emotional just even to talk about it, but it's, the things that these kids don't have access to or the opportunity to feel seen. We had a girl last year, we partnered with Fashion Island, and they gave us the opportunity to bring some kids over and, have lunch and get their nails done, or I don't exactly remember what they did. They went to go get some bath bombs or whatever. It was a special day. And one of the advocates and her youth participated in celebration of her birthday, and she shared that no one had ever celebrated her birthday with her before. So
chills.
Right? It's like those are the things that I think we tend to maybe take for granted. And so you don't think that they're that. I mean, you think going to court is a big deal, writing a report, you think that's going to be the thing. And yes, don't get me wrong, those things are wildly important and can be game changing for these kids in terms of how it changes the trajectory of their life. And I can speak about an example about that too. But what I think I'm the most touched by are those basic everyday examples of just being seen and feeling like you matter.
Yeah.
And a lot of these kids just don't have anyone that's either been able to or has prioritized that for them. And I think everyone should experience that.
Yeah. Are some of these kids, are they worried about being, gangs or like involvement in that and like what that might mean to them or their CASA advocate?
Yeah. I mean, it happens, right?
Yeah.
And again, my interpretation, my assessment about some of these things is that when you don't have a support system or you don't have a family of origin or a strong identity there, you're kind of looking for it anywhere. And I've heard of examples actually pretty recently from an advocate whose kid was living with a family member and doing pretty well, but, obviously struggling in different ways. And something happened with that placement and he ended up having to go to Orangewood Children's Home, distinguished from the foundation, the Children's Home over by the courthouses where kids go when there's kind of in between placements or if there's no one stepping up immediately to take them. Yeah. It's supposed to be a short-term living situation. It does not always work out that way. And there's not a lot of restrictions on these kids. And so he was placed there and these kids can come and go as they see fit and got just wrapped in with the wrong crowd. And, his life changed substantially. I mean, it was not great, but it was, he was doing okay and he was going to school and now he's affiliated with these kids, and it's just really been a game changer. So I do think, I tell my kids, and I've heard this from folks as well, you are the 5 people that you hang out with. And so the folks that are going there are not necessarily the right crowd, but I think there is this desire to feel like you're,
these kids are at risk.
Absolutely, they're
really
at risk. It's the same. I've heard some of our youth that are part of the CSEC, the commercially sexually exploited children program, speak about answering kind of the age old question. Well, why do you go back? Why are you going back? You got out. Why would you go back? And it's but they promised me a burger and a phone, and I'm telling you,
I believe it.
and when you are not feeling seen, and when you don't have anyone else in your life that's going to think about you in that way, the things that you will tolerate, especially as a young person, just seeking some kind of, I think, connection and validation. So what we're really trying to do is introduce healthy connections. And we don't ever want the CASA just to be the only connection. So we do want to find other opportunities, other people, other family members that are healthy and appropriate for these kids so that they can expand their circle and have a greater sense of connection.
If these kids are older, in high school age, and they're not doing well in school, will an advocate advocate for them to be in a vocational program?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had advocates. And this is one of my favorite statistics about CASA, because sometimes it's really hard to show exactly how strong our impact is. But if you look at the foster care population in the state of California, it's about a 50-50 shot whether or not a child will graduate from high school. If you put a CASA on the case for a child in foster care, that number jumps to 96%.
Oh, wow.
So
that's compelling.
Right?
Very.
So that's just high school. Mm-hmm. And now you've got somebody who, again, now someone's asking them about school, asking them how they're doing, making sure that they're getting their homework done. I mean, sometimes it's as basic as that. Someone just caring about the fact that what are you doing and how's it going? And do you need resources? We can get you some tutoring if you're struggling here. Oh, you need a computer. I mean, these are the things. If nobody knows that you're not getting your homework done because you don't have a computer, that's where the advocate is such a powerful resource and tool, because the judge is going to look at those grades and say, well, the grades are miserable, but it's probably because he's not at home and he's got all these other things going on. The advocate might be the one to say, hey, but we actually need something to help make that possible. It's been, an example with a kid sitting in the back, not getting good grades and not realizing that they needed eyeglasses. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are identified to just help them get a better educational experience. And then it's identifying what it is that you're interested in. Is there a trade school? We've had advocates help them get into four-year colleges and beyond. Yes, they're empowered to understand who that kid is and recognize that there's not the same path for everyone. That's true for you as it is for me and as is true for them. They don't all need the same thing, but with an advocate who understands them and knows them in a different way, they're able then to make suggestions, identify resources. We're happy to help in providing some of that, whether it's funding or whether it's a connection to another nonprofit or a different organization. So yeah, we're involved in all of those ways. Do
you have information about statistically what percentage of children that were born in the last 20 years will end up in the system?
End up in the system?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question, and I don't know that I have a good answer for you. The one that I hear a lot and is a little bit more disturbing, I guess, from my perspective, is that the percentage of folks that are incarcerated, what percentage of them came from or spent some portion of their youth in the foster care system. And that number has been identified as right around 75%, if not higher.
75% of people that are incarcerated in California right now were in the foster care system?
That is a number that has been associated with that that issue. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's not. I will tell you that it's not surprising to me if that is the right number. There's been some debate over what that number should look like. And again, we're not talking about kids that necessarily spent their whole childhood. They spent some portion of their childhood in the foster care system.
Yeah.
And they call it the prison pipeline to prison. So when you have had a youth that has been disrupted in that way, and you've spent some time perhaps in an institution, whether that's a group home, whether that's Orangewood, whether that's whatever that looks like, you're kind of on this journey that can oftentimes take you directly there. Look at the gang affiliations. There is a strong association. Again, if you don't have someone identifying and communicating with you, what are these choices that you're making? Why are you doing this? And I do think the CASA is a positive influence in these kids' lives that can sometimes disrupt that cycle. But if you don't have someone that is disrupting that cycle, and if your family of origin has had some affiliation with criminal activity or gang-related activity, it seems logical that would be where you go to.
It does. So at this point, has there ever been any research done on what percentage of the cost of kids that do get a CASA, what percentage of them end up never getting in trouble with the law?
So it's fascinating that you asked that too. We actually because my team, we're all kind of obsessed with wanting more data, right?
Yeah.
And there's
you need it to help you make these decisions on how to allocate resources. And
Absolutely.
Is it working? What can we do better? How can you keep these kids from getting in trouble?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's really, really difficult to secure that information for a variety of reasons. But we have an advocate, now a board member, who is a self-proclaimed, data scientist and all around data nerd. Like I sort of subscribe to that identity as well. Mm-hmm. So he helped us engage in our very first survey to try to elicit exactly what you're talking about. And we really focused on 5 categories. It was, criminal behavior, activity, incarceration, gang affiliation, homelessness, whether, the likelihood of being homelessness after emancipating, how many years after, if you've had a CASA, education and post-secondary education, employment. Maybe it was just those 4. I don't know. I know that there's a statistic that's often attributed to these kids too, that they tend to have.
What about drugs?
That was it. So yes. Okay. So that's what it was: homelessness, job, employment, incarceration and criminal activity, education and
substance abuse.
Yeah. That was it. Thank you so much. And it was a small sample. But we found that, of all the kids that were part of this survey, almost every single one of them had parents that were substance users or had some involvement there and had criminal activity and incarceration, a few of which had gang-affiliated activity, and almost none of the kids that we surveyed. And again, we're talking just 1 year after post-emancipation. We're early still.
1 year post. Okay.
We're early still.
Yeah.
But the goal is for us to grow this, to grow the population and to keep in touch in years.
That's so
but this
important.
is exactly the kind of data that we're looking to try to secure and collect.
Because it'll make a great case for why this is something that should not just be nonprofit funded.
But realistically, what I think the point that we were trying to arrive at is that this is really a form of early intervention. And so this is the thing with CASA. I feel like I can make a case for just about anybody about the heartstrings component of this and why it's a meaningful work, a meaningful investment for kids that are, in need of this service and in need of the support. But even if you're not touched by the emotional heartstrings of why this is valuable, there is an incredibly important, I think, community and financial ROI that we're getting based on that intervention that these advocates are having in their lives to disrupt these cycles of, criminal activity, substance abuse, homelessness, joblessness, increasing education rates. That benefits everyone. If we're changing those negative outcomes that have traditionally been very, very concerning for kids in the foster care system, and we're improving their likelihood of graduating and going on to post-secondary or vocational training, of not being homelessness, of not, being incarcerated, and all of these things, then, that's a community expense. We're paying for these kids anyway, as long as they're a part of the foster care system. And so if we can change those cycles, if we can disrupt that, and if we can improve outcomes, which is what we're really at the core of what we're doing, trying to do for these kids, there's a benefit to everyone there, because we're not, we're no longer paying for those issues on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it really comes down to for society is whether or not we want to pay for these people to try to retrain them once they're in prison.
Right.
Or, I mean, do we want to try to help them not get there in the first place?
Correct.
And that's really what it comes down to. So when we're talking about funding for these things, until this is something that society says we are going to fund this and we're going to make sure every kid has this kind of an advocate with them. Or maybe it just is going to be, the attorneys that represent them are given much smaller caseload so that they can give them the kind of attention that they need. I don't know how you feel about that.
I do think I think the system was created for, benevolent reasons and out of need. I just think it's not effective in its current form. I think there's, a need for radical transformation of how it operates, and certainly funding has been a component of that. But at the end of the day, these are kids that have been removed from their homes through no fault of their own. There is an opportunity, I think, here to either reunify the family safely with resources or training, or to hopefully get to a point where, to the extent that we're dealing with a situation of resources, lack of resources, a need for support, the overwhelming majority of these cases fall into the category of neglect. And that may be a situation where you're dealing with parents who have mental illness, who have a substance abuse disorder, maybe secondary to mental illness. That may, you have a single mom that's working 3 jobs and she's got little kids at home and she doesn't have anybody in her life that can help her. When you get, people calling in, this kid is not, supervised and potentially getting into trouble. You name it. There's lots of different reasons why these cases come. If we can get to the point where we're serving these families and addressing these issues beforehand, then we reduce the amount of kids that we're even bringing into care in the first place. And then when we have them, if we can't rectify that situation, which is always going to happen for these kids, I've seen it enough to know there are families that are not going to be able to complete their case plan and do what they need to do for whatever reason. We need to find a way to ensure that these kids get the services and support that they need so that they are then empowered when they leave the system to be an independent, self-sufficient, contributing member of society. My understanding and my experience tells me that even if the parents aren't able to get it together to complete that case plan and successfully reunify, if they're around when they emancipate these kids, they're going to return to find some kind of connection with their family of origin. It just happens. So we want to invest in these kids and make sure that they're strong and secure and stable, so that they feel like that's my origin story. Those are my parents. That's my, it's a part of my story, but it's not who I am and it's not what I need to return to, and to give them the ability to see a different way forward.
Yeah, most people are not involved in the system.
Yeah.
The majority of people
Correct.
are able to take care of their own children.
Correct.
So this is a very small percentage of our population that is served by CASA, by this system. But at the same time, there's such a high percentage of people that are incarcerated that came from this system. And I mean, in my case, the crime that was committed against my family, that was not somebody that came through this system. So, there is a small percentage, I guess, of people in the system that are just violent criminals because, that's just what they do.
Yes.
Yes. But the majority of these people, that's not necessarily true.
Correct.
So, as a society, if we're concerned about crime, I personally am.
Right.
I've been the victim of crime twice in my life, serious crimes now. And, it's important. Until you've actually been a victim of a crime, you may not realize how important it is
Right.
that we do something about this. But,
Right.
And maybe that's something that we just really need to think about, that, even if you aren't personally affected by this population, it doesn't mean that it won't affect you at some time in your future.
That's absolutely
and
right.
You may not even know how it's affecting you now. Because
That's absolutely right.
Because if, these kids, when they get in trouble later, when they get in trouble for, shoplifting or gang activity or whatever it is, all of those things, we as a society pay a price for that.
Yes.
A huge price. So,
Yes.
This is all part of that. It's like the same reason that we educate children in the first place.
Yes.
Because if we don't do it, then either they don't get an education or they get an education that is deeply flawed and could even be full of radicalism. I mean, you just don't know what children's heads will be filled with if we don't fill it with knowledge that they need to have a good life in this world. So, that's just all part of us making sure that the next generation is healthy and able to continue to do the hard work of making this world a better place.
Absolutely.
That's why we're here. And with that, I'm going to end our time together. We're going to have you come back with your Chief Development Officer, Erica.
I'm so excited.
And we're going to talk about what we can all do to ensure that CASA has a future here in Orange County. And we're going to learn more. We're going to learn more, and we're going to get excited about doing something about the problem. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me today, Jeanne. It has been lovely to sit and chat with you. And I love that you are dedicating this podcast to sharing about good things happening in the community and in the world. We all need to be reminded of that. So thank you.
I agree with you. And I think that the work that you're doing is really pivotal to making this world better, because children are the future.
Yes.
And you're part of that. And I thank you and all the work that CASA does to ensure that the children of the future are people that will make this world better.
And if you want to learn more about how you can make a difference with CASA of Orange County, please visit us at CASAOC.org.
Hashtag Blaze It Forward is a campaign my family started in 2018 after our son Blaze was murdered. Hashtag Blaze It Forward provides the inspiration to thousands of people to repair the world with intentional acts of kindness. If you would like to learn more about Blaze and how you can make a difference, check out www.blazebernstein.org or join our Facebook group at hashtag Blaze It Forward. You can also check out my website for this podcast at www.PeppTalksWithJeanne.com. There you can follow along with my podcasting adventures and learn more about my fascinating guests and their passion projects. I would like to thank all of the volunteers who help make my philanthropic endeavors a reality. Today, that includes my producer, Eli Moskowitz, all of the volunteer crew members who join us, and a special thank you to my son, Jay Bernstein, for the original theme song you hear at the beginning and ending of each show. This has been another episode of Pep Talks with Jeanne. Until next time, keep on making this world a better place.